Welcome to Regenerative Life Hacks, where we give you shortcuts to create more meaning and significance in life and work. We offer stories with real people who bring change to their lives. We invite people to learn the hacks through the Regenerative Life Project, and then they tell us their story. Join us for the project and see what you can share with us. Stay tuned at the end to learn how. I'm Max Zonizer, co-host for the Regenerative Life Hacks. And with me, as always, is Carol Sanford, our positive contrarian who takes on hard challenges, building capability to see the essence of life, situations, and transform how to take them on. Hi, Carol. What are we talking about on today's show?
Hi, Max. It's good to see you. And thanks, by the way, for being on our last show. So, what we're talking about today is, it's kind of what we always talk about, one of the 9 roles in the regenerative life. But today, we're picking up with the educator. And I want to remind people that these are not like job titles. You can be a parent or a citizen in society, and you still can say, this situation is calling for educator. And so let me give just a little overview of what that means before you introduce our guests and get us rolling. Is that okay?
That sounds great.
I think, yeah, I think of educator in a very old uh, looking at the root of the word way. And it's really about not putting stuff into people as much as it is drawing it out, but sometimes giving people a better way to think about their experience and to make sense of it. And so the old Latin word, which it comes from, is educare, to draw out and draw through. And we use it that way in the book. You can see more there. But it has kind of 3 aspects to its essence. Uh, One aspect of it is because it's about drawing out, it's about developing intelligence of people. In other words, I don't know about your school, but I bet it was a lot like my school, where what happened was you were expected to learn somebody else's content, take a test, pass the test, and get promoted. Here, what we're talking about is helping people become more intelligent. And by that, we mean able to make sense of a living world, able to be in it in a way they can contribute. And we believe that the best way for educare or education to happen is not in an isolated classroom somewhere, or in a, even if it's a parent being an educator, not sitting a kid down and trying to teach them something, but to do it in what we call a value adding process. And that means where the person learning is seeking to do something that matters for others. Therefore, the value adding being brought into life. That's the best place to learn. It's in that contextual environment where you're committed to being able to make a difference. And the third thing, which is part of this particular role, is that nothing happens in isolation. We know it's a matrix, a living matrix, and that everything, including what often would be called a teacher or a professor or a lecturer, uh, is no longer thinking of as a title role, but as someone who is serving as a resource to help others think and know they're going to grow in the process. So that co-evolving sense. So that's what we're looking at today. And Max, who's going to help us do that?
Great, Carol. Today we have Mary Casey joining us from Down Under. Mary has a story and a hack to share with us around the role of the regenerative educator that you've been talking about. Welcome, Mary.
Thanks, Max. How are you? Hi, Carol. Nice to be here.
Hi, Mary. Great to have you with us. Thank you for joining us not only today, but you joined the project a couple of times, right? Even before we wrote the book, and then you saw enough value, came back again. Could you say in just a sentence or two what the experience was and the nature of the disruption that being in the project causes? Because you're a smart person doing good stuff. What did it add to your discovery experience?
Yeah, sure. I think the The real shift for me, I've come to my work from a real desire to be a contribution. And that sort of showed up in a do good kind of mode previously as a kind of a projection of what I think good should be onto the world. And the real transformation for me in this project was understanding that that if I'm going to evolve myself and my understanding, I need to be open to hearing what the world wants to have happen. And so this educare mindset initially seemed to me as a way to, as you were saying earlier, to sort of share things that I'm really enthusiastic about with other people, but largely from a mode of telling or giving advice or trying to be helpful.
So, Mary, tell us about the situation for the project that you chose to adapt your own learning and grow you because of who the group was you were working with, the specific group.
It was a client group in a workshop.
And what were they working on?
Yeah, we were designing a precinct, a multi-use precinct.
All right, so I can see really live a group of people they got something they think it's important, and they're counting on you to help them do something meaningful with this conversation. Now, normally you would have kind of walked in one way of doing that, but instead you stopped yourself. You're involved in this project. Said, "Wait, you're working as an educator, even though." Your role is a facilitator consulting with them. It needed education. How did that change once you had this project in mind, had this role in mind, how you would work with your client before and then how you did it then? That brought more of this role to.
Yeah, I think previously I would have shown up as an expert and I would have shown up feeling the need to supply answers or give advice. And what changed through working in the educare way was being much more interested in what what was already in the group in terms of knowledge and understanding of the place, and seeking to draw that out of them and bring that into the conversation rather than me trying to feed any content in.
And that mean you gave them nothing, or what did you give them that really gave them a way to think together?
Yeah, I ended up asking them a series of questions to help them uncover that. So it was guiding their discussion towards a point of alignment rather than I was really conscious of restraining myself from putting any answers in or asking any yes or no type questions. They're very open-ended questions to just keep the conversation moving. And I was aware of how that was a different kind of work, different kind of way of participating in that discussion.
All right, so let me add something, because we know in the project, one of the things that became really important is asking questions. It's through a framework. So they can see the framework and you can see the framework, and they don't figure you're making out questions that are being dragged along by you wherever you go. They can actually see where you're going. And we talked about that quite a bit in the project. Could you tell us what framework you were sharing as you worked, so that the questions you were being sourced from you through that framework and they were able to see that? Can you help us with that?
Yes, I used the 3 lines of work and I explained, sorry, I did not explain. I walked them through the framework before we started. And then I let them ask me any questions if they had any, and everybody seemed quite happy to proceed with that as a basis for the conversation.
Mary, I love that what you said was, I explained. No, I didn't explain. That is I do that all the time, because you have to catch yourself. So, uh, how did the framework you were using, in this case, you're describing 3 lines of work, which let me describe what that is for folks. And then you talk about how it informed what kind of questions you ask and how you use it. So, 3 lines of work says, we live in a nested world. We don't live on a plane that we're all one connected to another. I am nested in a community like you were with this group, which is connected and nested in a country, and on a very large island in the South Deep Pacific. How did you use that framework to engage with them, and a little bit about what did it do? What could you see it doing for them? And how did you keep modifying how you were working with them to help them learn that framework and see it in the working?
I think it helped give the conversation a context. It kept the conversation connected to the thing that we were working on. So it rather than people going off into abstractions or concepts that were not arising from this location, it kept the life of the specific place that we were talking about in center of the discussion.
And how did it help you think about questions as you were forming them? How did you use it in your own mind?
For me, it was most valuable in keeping me out of the expert mindset and wanting to understand more about the workings of this place. I was very conscious that there was more knowledge in the room of the specific location than what I had personally. And whereas previously that might have caused me to go ahead and do a bunch of research in advance of the workshop, focusing on the use of this framework and how I could be a contribution to that discussion by guiding people through this framework was, I felt, much more value adding and beneficial than me duplicating understanding content. So for me, I guess it gave me a lot of confidence, maybe that I could still bring something to that conversation that was of great value.
And what would you say you kind of overall learned out of that day? Because you do this consulting kind of work and the facilitation work almost every day of your life, and have for at least a decade, right? Some period of time. But it had some effect on you to do this. Can you tell us what you think shifted for you in that experience?
I think the main shift was that in seeing that focusing on educare and drawing out allowed me to see that I get drawn out as well, and it's a two-way interaction, and that I become really curious and engage in a different place in those conversations than I might have done previously. That being in the inquiry and being in that creative space rather than looking to supply or even find answers, this just is a much richer and more energizing way of working with colleagues and clients and family and friends.
Right, right. And it's interesting just listening to you. When you talk about it from really reflecting, you have so much more energy. And I assume the group did too, because you had things so much more alive. So I have one last question for you. We invite others to join this project and disrupt themselves from the normal way they would work and take on a role like you took on for this event, the educator role. You aren't in everyday life an educator in a school or a trainer or anywhere, but you use that project idea. Why would you advise, if you would, or suggest that they consider joining the project and then telling us their story so we can share it? You know, what value would they get?
Well, I think one of the ways that we work is that you don't understand these ideas until you experience them. So what I thought was the real opportunity of this project was having a structured way of exploring this role that would give me the opportunity to have an idea, try it out, reflect on it, and do that iteratively over a period of time. And the just the process of trying then at the end of that process to distill what was the key lesson, what was the key thing I learned out of that, um, has really helped
Yeah,
me to embed that into my self and my practice now. So I don't think that, for me anyway, that doesn't happen with the same effectiveness or speed if it's not attached to uh, um, something like this.
yeah. Well, I deeply appreciate us telling your story and sharing your hack of that Educari is a reciprocity, a two-way process, and how that's affecting you. So thank you. But hold on a moment because we get questions from our audience, sometimes in advance, sometimes in real life. And Max, can you pick up and take us into that section?
Yeah, great conversation, Carol and Mary. Really illuminating. And every show we take questions from our audience also, um, about what they want to reconcile in their own lives and work. Um, and so our guests always take a run at it, and then Carol usually adds her own responses as well. Um, so the question, Mary, that we have for you and Carol today is, how do you handle people who are skeptical about your work? So perhaps in one of the situations like the one you're talking about, say you get some pushback or skepticism, what's how do you hold that, and how do you handle it?
Well, I think the main thing is I become curious about what's their resistance to what I'm offering, and so it becomes an opportunity for greater understanding of their perspective. Um, I suppose in the past when I've experienced what doesn't work, when you double down and you proselytize and you have a debate, um, that doesn't lead to connection. That
Yep.
cuts everything off. So it's much more valuable for me to ask them to do the educare, draw out and say, well, what's happening for you as I'm saying this that's causing you to be skeptical or have questions. Help me understand where you're coming from, and then that it certainly enriches my perspective, but it also builds a relationship between me and that person.
That's great. Thanks, Mary. Carol, do you have anything to add there, Carol?
Of course, I have something to add. Although I thought I do understand what May said, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in what she was offering. One I would say is similar to hers, but maybe adding kind of a different window. I always, it's my opening comment. I often don't let people introduce me and give my whole backstory or any part of it. Instead, I say, I'm going to work incredibly differently. And this is for the people once we're in a group, although I will have done the same thing with people who are inviting me to come help. And I'll say, I have two principles I'd like for you to operate from. One is don't trust me, don't accept anything I say to you without examining with your experience that we're going to do here. So noticing what your current thoughts are as I'm doing something in particular, because my principle is I don't operate as an expert. I believe I operate as skilled in helping design for you getting what you want. But the other thing is don't reject anything I offer without again examining it with your experience here and applying it, because it's going to be different right now. So if you don't want different, you've been forewarned. But if you're open to discovery, the odds are good that you will find something from your own experience that will be meaningful. And one quick second thing, I believe that trying to correct or do anything in real time, like if there's a person who's talking to me and pushing back on something, I don't try and tell them anything. I think Mary's saying this too. Instead, I always, and by the way, this is true for children as well. We try and correct them and get them where we want them, rather than creating separate events for education to experience it. And often those people who are skeptical, I think was your term, are some of the best designers, and we put them in the design team with us to work on things we all really care about. So there's my addition.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's interesting that sort of expectation that you're talking about, Carol, at the front end of, don't accept or reject this. There's such a level of credibility that forms, and it also creates, I think, in folks, you're inviting them to a level of like openness and integrity that's powerful and kind of hard to resist. Like it's not really something that you want to reject. It's like, well, it'd be unreasonable not to at least do that. So that's great.
Right. It's a hack in and of itself.
It is. It is. So any quick closing thoughts, anyone, before we kind of read out the session today?
No, thanks, Mary, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you to all our guests. All of our guests moving forward will have joined the Regenerative Life Project just by buying 5 copies of the Regenerative Life book, sending the receipt to us, and then we'll let you into the project to take on the challenge of the Regenerative Life self-directed mini course that you'll then gain access to. Then we jointly review and consider the stories that you submit, and whether you'll then be a guest on the show. So thanks to everyone out there on the interwebs also for joining us on this episode. Please hit the like button if you got anything out of this, or maybe even if you didn't. And also consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon so you get notified whenever we add more episodes. Bye for now.